Hello, welcome. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Emily Putz from Nature Saskatchewan will be speaking about loggerhead shrikes. Last year, Emily presented about monarch butterflies. It was a fabulous presentation, so I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they've worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. And before we begin, I'd like to note that PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series is a monthly presentation about anything to do with prairie conservation or species at risk. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us on January 30th for a webinar about Stewards kangaroo rats. It'll be our first webinar ever about that topic. And on February 6th for a webinar about the 2024 piping plover census by Nature Saskatchewan. You can register for PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series webinars on our website. And most of our past webinars have been recorded and can be found on the PCAP YouTube channel. And this webinar will be uploaded there in the near future. A reminder to our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, just type it into the Q&A section of the webinar dashboard at any time, and questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association, North American Helium, Nutrien, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and SaskTel. And in-kind support has been provided by Nature Saskatchewan. I'm pleased to introduce Emily. Emily has worked for Nature Saskatchewan since 2014. It's hard to believe it's 10 years. And she was hired full-time in 2016 as a coordinator for Nature Saskatchewan Species at Risk programming. Over her years with the organization, she spent time coordinating the rare plant rescue and Operation Burrowing Out until finding her permanent role as the Habitat Stewardship Coordinator for Shrubs for Shrikes, Plovers on Shore, and the Stewards of Saskatchewan banner program. And when she's not working, she's enjoying her time on her small hobby farm with her fiance, Evan, and their dogs, cats, horses, ducks, geese, and sheep. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Caitlin. Just share my screen. All right, so hopefully everything looks good there. So thanks for that introduction. As Caitlin mentioned, my name's Emily Putz. I'm a Habitat Stewardship Coordinator for Nature Saskatchewan's Shrubs for Shrikes program. And I'll be doing a webinar today on the loggerhead shrike. So this presentation is supposed to be a broad overview of everything you could possibly want to know about shrikes. But if you have any questions at the end, I'd be more than happy to answer them. All right, so to just get into it here, I'm just gonna move that over. So the prairie loggerhead shrike is actually one of 7 to 11 subspecies of loggerhead shrikes, depending on whether you're a lumper or a splitter, all of which make their home in North America. 2 of those make their home in Canada. So there's the eastern loggerhead, which is kind of, well, to the east. It kind of dips up into Ontario, and it used to extend all the way over to Manitoba. That subspecies is now endangered and occurs in just a small, tiny region of Canada. And the prairie loggerhead shrike, which is what this presentation is about today. And that one occurs through the prairie provinces, so Alberta, Saskatchewan, and a bit of Manitoba. So the prairie loggerhead shrike has had declines noticed since the 1960s, and it was officially listed as threatened in the mid-80s. Population decline overall in their range from 1970 onward has been about a 80% decline. In Saskatchewan, targeted surveys within a 10-year period from 2003 to 2013, which is the last time it was estimated, show a 54.3 decline. So we have a fairly large decline in our province as well, and we're kind of the stronghold for this species in Canada, so we're a very important area for their breeding each year. There's thought to be currently around 40,000 shrikes left in Saskatchewan, 7,000 in Alberta, and 100 in Manitoba. So their Latin name actually means the butcher that watches, which is a quite intense Latin name, and it actually describes two of their behaviors, which I'll talk about in this presentation. So just a little bit on their range decline here. So you can see historically their range went much further north and right into Alberta there, and then right across Manitoba. And has shrunk every like 10-year period. It's shrinking quite a bit. And these days, it just dips into the corner of Manitoba, kind of along the Souris River system. Still has some shrikes here and there, but it's quite rare. They're quite rare in Manitoba. And then I just have a more detailed picture of where they occur. This map is from 2022 off of eBird, so you can kind of see where they occur locally within the province. The gap towards the east, that's like the Moose Mountain area. And then the one towards the west is the Cypress Hills, so just kind of higher elevation areas. So our shrikes split their time between Saskatchewan and Texas and Mexico each year, flying north-south across the Great Plains of North America. So you can see that they're here in the summer, and then that's where they go in the winter time. Their life cycle throughout the year, I'm just going to go through it here. So starting in the spring, in March, they start their spring migration northwards from their wintering grounds. And by late April, the males have arrived and start establishing territories. So the males arrive first and start to set up territories. They tend to arrive together and then kind of split apart and like to go to areas where shrikes have been in the past. By May, the females have arrived and the adults have paired up. And towards the end of May, they've chosen their nesting sites and have started building their nests. In June, the females have started laying their eggs. Within the first few weeks, they lay 5 to 8 eggs, and the females will incubate them while the males provide them food. By the end of the month, the eggs are hatching, and the parents begin being very busy feeding all those hungry mouths. In July, that's when the juveniles start to molt into their juvenile plumage, and they begin leaving the nests as fledglings. And then they kind of stick around together in family groups until into August, where the juveniles become independent and fall migration begins at the end of that month. In September, it's in full swing. You might have some late stick-arounds that are still here, but most of them have left. And then they all head down to Texas and Mexico, which is their wintering grounds, as I mentioned. So here's just a visualization of that throughout the year. So you can see they come up in the spring. There's June, July, August, and then in September, they're going down and they're back in their southern grounds. So what's in a name? So the Loggerhead Shrike, we're going to break it down. So Loggerhead is named for their oversized head in comparison to their body. So Loggerhead actually means blockhead. And you can see on the picture on the left, they do have quite a chunky head in comparison to their body. So it's quite big, gives them a lot of strength. And then Shrike is actually named for their alarm call, which is described as a shriek. And you'll hear that in a little bit, but it's quite accurate. The Loggerhead Shrike, we like to joke that it's a songbird who thinks it's a hawk. So they have dainty little songbird feet, which an arrow on the left picture is pointing to. But then they have a pretty thick bill with a curved hook on the end there. And they use that to hunt their prey. Now, in that right photo, you'll see before the hook on the end of their bill, they also have a little bit of a bump, a sharp bump, like close to the edge. And that's their terminal tooth. It's a little notch and it fits into a bottom groove in their bill, and it actually acts like a pair of scissors to snip their prey's spinal cord. So it just helps them be more efficient because they are smaller. So you'll notice that with a lot of smaller birds of prey like kites and falcons and shrikes, of course. Overall, their bodies are gray, black, and white, and they have that really strong mask that goes across their eyes and extends back towards their ears. Now, their wings and their tails are black and white. So they're mostly black with white markings. The wings have white badges on them, and then the tail feathers have white margin feathers. They use both of these white markings on their wings and their tails in flashing behavior. So they catch light really well. That's actually a good ID tool. If you see a bird flying and it catches the light, those white patches do that. And they actually do this on purpose to flush or startle prey out of cover. Or when they're trying to like scare away a predator, they'll flash those wings and it causes like a distraction by catching the light. Okay, so I wanted to go through a few of the vocalizations of shrikes. Lots of people are familiar with their alarm call, but these guys are songbirds, so they do have other more pretty and delicate calls as well. So I'll just go through a few here. So they have a couple different calls. Hopefully you guys can hear those. So this one's kind of bubblier. And then, of course, their alarm calls, more people would be familiar with. They're quite abrasive. And then they have their territory call. It almost sounds, it's very high pitch. And then, of course, if anybody has been around a nest when there's young, you'll be familiar with their juveniles begging calls, which are pretty constant in July when they're out and about begging for food. Hopefully you guys can hear that one. I cut out for me. And then, of course, they also have songs. They are songbirds, so they have a pretty nice kind of bubbly song. It's very quiet compared to other songs. All right, so on to their nests and eggs. So nests, if you're wondering where they might nest in your yard site, they usually like to nest about chest height for a human, an adult human, in the crook of a tree or a shrub. And they like quite dense trees or shrubs, so they don't like a lot of visibility. So pretty dense areas, and they like thorny shrubs too, which I'll explain in a little bit. The nests are cup-shaped and they lay 5 to 6 is the average number of eggs, but they can lay up to 8. And the eggs are buffy colored with speckling. So once the babies are hatched, they are attritial, which means that they rely on their parents quite heavily for the first few weeks in their lives. So they'll stay in the nest until they're about 16 to 20 days old, and they're completely reliant on their parents in that time. The younger shrikes, when they're in their nest, they always look to me like they're pretty grumpy about something. So they kind of have a bit of a frown going on, and their markings are pretty sparse, and they just look grumpy to me. Once they leave the nest, they'll still rely on their parents for about 3 to 5 weeks until they're fully independent. They start to look more similar to their parents. They're still a bit puffy and round, and they've got those short little cute wings and tails, and their markings overall are less defined, and they kind of have like a brown buffy overtone to them. You can see in that picture there, the babies kind of look a little more brown than the parents, and they've got like a light barring all over their feathers. So now we're going to get into some hunting and food behavior. As I mentioned before, the loggerhead shrike, we like to joke, is a songbird who thinks it's a hawk. But they are very ferocious little predators, and they're great hunters. They have several techniques. So they are opportunistic. So they'll hunt basically anything that they can carry, and they can carry as much of, as their own weight. So, mice or birds as large as themselves are all fair game. And they'll also scavenge larger prey if it's available and they have the opportunity to do so, as long as they can take chunks off that they can carry. Mostly, though, they eat insects as their main diet, especially in the summertime. A pair that's got babies going, about 30 to 70% of their diet are grasshoppers. So grasshoppers are especially important to these guys, and they're great pest control for grasshoppers in the yard site. Shrikes also show an individual preference in prey choices. So they do have individual personalities, and some will prefer, they might specialize in garter snakes or really like mice, and they'll adjust their hunting to specialize in these prey items. Hunting techniques there can vary depending on their prey. So they do hover hunt, so as other birds do, where they'll hover above the grass and then they'll duck down once they see something and grab a grasshopper. They use their wings, like I mentioned, to startle prey out into the open. And as I mentioned, their Latin name means the butcher that watches. So they also watch, and they'll sit on the top of a perch or branch, and they'll just watch until something comes up. If something moves and they see it, they'll swoop down on it. And as I mentioned, their bill acts as scissors, so they will kill larger prey with a bite to the back of the neck, severing the spinal cord. With large prey, this is often accompanied by a really big head shake. And that's actually the equivalent of a human getting whiplash from a car crash. So it's quite a bit of force behind that shake, and that helps the neck snap and then them to deal with that prey a little easier. So the butcher that watches, so the butcher, a nickname for the loggerhead shrike is butcher bird, and that's after their behavior of impaling their prey. So I maybe should have warned that this slide is a little gory. So just like a butcher would impale or hook their meat slabs up onto a hook and hang it there, that's what the shrikes do. So they do this because they have dainty little songbird feet. So they don't have big talons like a larger raptor would, where they can hold their prey to rip chunks off. So they need something to hold it for them, and they use spikes or thorns to do this. And then they have something to hold it while they take little chunks off. Now, this behavior is also used in other parts of their life cycle. So the male shrikes will actually impale prey in their courtship displays to show like what good providers they are. I actually was visiting a landholder once, and they had a male shrike who preferred garter snakes and was trying to attract a girl and hung garter snakes from on every section of fence up this guy's driveway. And the guy said that his neighbors thought he really hated garter snakes because they were hung all the way up his drive in a line there. And he never did attract a girl, that Shrike, but he sure tried his best. Um, they'll also impale their prey to mark territory boundaries to show that that's their area. And the adults, especially early summer, when they don't quite have young yet to feed, they'll actually create larders or pantries of prey. And this is often in a shrub that's close by to the nest or surrounding the nest sometimes. And they basically collect prey while it's plentiful. And then they have kind of that to fall back on when they have a lot of hungry mouse to feed later in the summer. So you'll often, that's a good way to know if you've got a nest nearby. If you see like a shrub with a ton of things hanging in it, that's often their storage area. And I should mention there, as I mentioned, they'll be opportunistic sometimes with even roadkill. So that one picture there, that's a gopher head. A gopher or ground squirrel is way too big for shrikes to take themselves, but this guy, they obviously found it and the head was easily carried off. So they do take food where they can find it. Now, as shrikes need thorns to impale their prey, they prefer a few specific species of thorny shrub in their habitat and will specifically target areas with these in them. So if you're wondering if your habitat hosts these species, we're going to briefly go through their ID. So the first one is buffalo berry. So this is a thorny shrub commonly seen on native grasslands or along pasture fence lines. It often kind of likes to grow where that moisture collects on the fence line. It's often found in coulee systems as well. And it's very thorny, as I mentioned. The thorns are on the tips of the stem with this guy. The bushes are unisex, which means they're either male or female. Both male and female have flowers that are pale yellow. You can see that in the lower left photo. The leaves are oblong and they're kind of a silvery color. And then the females get berries developing, which are bright red. And these berries you can actually eat too if you want to go berry collecting. It's recommended that you wait till after frost because they get sweeter. They're kind of bitter before then, but they make good jam if you're wondering. The other species we're gonna just go over is hawthorn. So hawthorn, there's actually 3 species native to Saskatchewan. Round-leafed hawthorn is the most common. The other 2 are quite rare. So if you have hawthorn, it's likely a round-leafed hawthorn. These grow in coulees and along creek banks. And it grows a little more north than buffalo berry, I find. So it kind of takes over for buffalo berry in some of those more northern areas, though it can be found across southern Saskatchewan. It's in the rose family. So if you guys have kind of horticultural apples or cherry or pear trees, you might be familiar with what the flowers look like. And these guys, their flowers look very similar. So they're white and very pretty. And then their berries are bright red and they kind of look similar to an ornamental apple or a rose hip because they're in the same family there. The thorns on these guys, they grow midway up the stem, so not on the tips of the stem, and can get very big. So thorns can grow up to 6 centimeters long, so they make really good spikes for the shrikes. And the leaves have toothed edges. And of course, humans have introduced one other thorn to shrike habitat, the ultimate thorn, and the shrikes have readily taken advantage of that, and that's the barbed wire. So this is basically sturdy and unbreakable for them, so it makes a great thorn for them to impale stuff on. And while it's not preferred on the landscape, piles of barbed wire have been known to attract nesting as well. So no predator is going to brave sticking their snout in a tangle of barbed wire. So it makes a very effective protection for the nest. And shrikes will treat it just like they would a thorny shrub. So in the top right picture there, you might be able to spot there's actually 4 fledglings in that picture, and their nest is right in the middle of that tangle of barbed wire. So they do use it if it's on the landscape, and they can get in there and others can't. So it does make effective protection. Good nesting areas. So we mentioned thorny shrubs, but what else do you need to have shrikes? So shrikes prefer habitat that has 3 main characteristics. So shrubs or trees to nest, pasture and grassland to hunt with plentiful prey, and then thorns to impale their prey. So historically, native grassland and buffaloberry and hawthorn habitat would supply all 3 of these and would make the ideal habitat. But as settlement happened, shrikes are very adaptable, and they've adapted to use yard sites, shelter belts. They use both abandoned and occupied yard sites. As long as there's a mature shelter belt around it, they'll be attracted to it. In a yard setting, they often will nest in like conifers or carigana. Both of those species are really prickly if you've ever tried to stick your hand in them. So the shrikes will use them as good dense protection for their nests, and then they'll use nearby barbed wire fences for the impalement behaviors. And to stay on theme, these little predators also like to nest in cemeteries and prairie graveyards. So they can often be found in these areas, and we actually target them when we're doing our Loggerhead Shrike grid road surveys in the summer. We'll make sure that we get out and check these areas for shrikes because they're found there so often. They'll also use areas like golf courses, parks, like ball diamonds, anything like that. They can be found there as well, as long as there's good good shelter belts in the area. And they like these areas because usually the shelter belts are pretty mature. They're not disturbed a lot. And then the middle of those areas are often mowed short. So it makes good, they have a perch from their nest, and they can look out across, and they can easily see the prey that are in the short grass and swoop down on it. And especially like prairie cemeteries, they're usually surrounded by more habitat, like whether it's crop, pasture, hayland, so better areas for them to hunt as well. And that picture there, that was a massive shrike nest. It's quite big that they were nesting in a tree in the cemetery there. So if you're looking to boost your habitat for shrikes, there's a few things you can do. So abandoned farmsteads, as I mentioned, make ideal habitat for them. So it's encouraged to keep them around if you're, moving to your yard site to a different area to keep that other area going. Not only does this benefit the shrikes, but it also, those areas work as great cover for other species such as turkey, grouse, deer, moose. As well as maintaining old growth trees and shrubs, and to allow some areas to have like those dead branches that stick out the top. They might not look the best, but they make great perches for shrikes and other species to hunt from, and the shrikes are attracted to them. And then just maintaining your shelter belts and shrub lines is strongly encouraged. A lot of shelter belts are being ripped out these days to allow bigger machinery to come in, and these areas support a lot of wildlife, not just shrikes. So we try and get people to keep them around. Okay, so now we're just going to talk about, so you think you have the habitat, you see birds flying. How do you know if it's a shrike or not? So in this picture here on this slide, there's actually only one loggerhead shrike on this slide. So some of these guys may look fairly obvious. You might say that's an imposter right away. And some of them may look very close indeed. So how do you tell if you're looking at a loggerhead shrike? So we're going to start with the trickiest one, which is the northern shrike. So these guys are extremely similar looking to loggerhead shrikes, but they breed far up north, and then southern Saskatchewan is their balmy winter vacation. So these guys are our winter shrikes in southern Saskatchewan, whereas loggerheads are our summer shrikes. So the loggerheads are here in the summer, northern are here in the winter, and they only really overlap during migration in the spring and the fall. These guys, both the males and the females, actually sing over the entire year, which is a little unusual for a songbird. And the males will sing more vigorously in late winter to early spring. So you might hear these guys singing in your yard. And they display most of the same behaviors as loggerhead shrikes. So they'll do impalements, but there's no grasshoppers here in the winter. So they more readily look for mice and birds to hunt in the wintertime. So kind of this time of the year, if you see a shrike hang out around your bird feeder, it's a northern shrike, and they're attracted to bird feeders because of all the dropped seed attracts mice, and then they might kind of swoop down and take a sparrow here and there as well. So telling our shrikes apart, I chose a very obvious northern shrike here just to like clearly show the differences. But sometimes your northern shrikes can look very extremely similar depending on the individual to a loggerhead shrike. So you know, your time of year is always your first important indicator on what kind of shrike you're looking at. But if it's during migration, there's a few things you can look at to kind of tell them apart. So our northern shrike, overall, their markings are less defined. So they don't have like that sharp, crisp markings that the loggerhead on the right there have. They're kind of less defined overall and a little more sparse. Their chest will often have light barring and be a little buffy in color. Sometimes that's hard to see and sometimes it's really obvious. And then you want to look at their mask and their face. So the mask does not extend over the eye usually, and they have that white line kind of on top of the mask, and that's often very obvious right over their beak. So you can see they have white over their beak. You can also look on the lower bill. I don't know if you can see it in the picture there, but they have a bit of white on the lower bill as well. So you want to look for that, whereas the loggerheads, their whole beak is black. The other lookalike in the summer, so now we're talking about summer birds, is the eastern kingbird. So this is a large aerial insectivore, but they're often found in the exact same habitats as shrikes. So they like some of the same things, especially those branches that come out to perch on and hunt from. These guys like to perch on those as well, and so you'll find them kind of in the same area. They'll even nest in similar dense shrubs. So I have a big buffalo berry patch in my yard, and I get excited every year because there's always a nest there, and I see the birds and I get excited. Wonder if it's a shrike, and it's never without fail an eastern kingbird. So they can be found in buffalo berry patches as well. So you do kind of want to look out for these guys. So they're really, really good aerial acrobats. So you often see them twisting through the air, chasing flies and other insects. And they also do that hover hunting right over the grass that the shrikes do. So they'll hover hunt and then dip in for something that flies out. These guys are extremely aggressive. So they're definitely the king of their little area. So they'll attack each other. If there's another kingbird encroaching on their space, they'll go after basically any large predator that comes within their area. They've even been known to just like hunt out and attack blue jays that are perched nearby. So they defend their area quite aggressively. So that's one of the behaviors you can look for. So if you're telling them apart, the first thing I would look for is the gray on the Shrike. So the Shrikes have that slight gray all along their back, and that's definitely lacking on the Eastern Kingbirds. So overall, Eastern Kingbirds are more black and white with a bit of brown on their wing feathers there. They also have a mask, but I like to call their mask like more of a Princess Bride mask, so it goes right over their head. Um, and whereas the Loggerhead Shrike has more of a bandit mask, so it just goes across their eyes. While in flight, Eastern Kingbirds also have white margins on their feathers, but not as big as the Loggerhead Shrike. And then look at their beak. So they have a longer pointy beak and it's missing that hook on the end. So we also have a second kind of kingbird. So Saskatchewan has Western and Eastern kingbirds. So the Western kingbird here, it displays a lot of similar behaviors to the Eastern. They're very aggressive. They're found in similar habitats as Shrikes and Eastern. And you might be thinking, what the heck? These guys have bright yellow stomachs. How can you possibly get them confused with a Shrike? But I would say this is actually the trickier of the two kingbirds. So this is actually the one that we spend more time on with our students in the summer because they're confused more often than the Eastern kingbird with the Shrike. And that's because if you take a look at their head there, they do have that slate gray head and a bit of a black mask. And depending on the light, that mask can look very obvious. And if they're flying, you don't really see their bright yellow belly. It can trick your eye. So you always just want to wait and wait for them to turn around and flash that bright yellow belly before you make your ID there, because as soon as you see the yellow, it's really obvious, but the mask can definitely trick you a bit. So more often than not, you'll see the lookalikes, and that's because shrikes are becoming very rare, as I mentioned. So some of the things that are threats to their recovery, the biggest one is always with most of these species, habitat loss. So for shrikes, unfortunately, it's a bit of a double whammy because native prairie is being plowed. A lot of you folks might know that Saskatchewan only has about 13 to 14% of our native prairie left, and more is lost each year. So they are quite limited in their kind of more historical habitat that they would be found in. But they're also losing their adapted habitat. So, shrikes have adapted to using shelter belts because their normal prairie habitat is now gone. And they do use them quite well. But now it's pretty common, especially in the wintertime, to see these big ripped out burn piles of shelter belts, and that's all lost shrike habitat. So those shrikes will come back in the spring and they won't have that shelter belt there any longer. So they'll have to find a new area. They also are at risk of road mortality is a big one, especially for the babies. And that's because shelter belts are often found along the road. Roads get nice and warm and attract a lot of insects in the summertime. And once the young are out of the nest, they're attracted to these places to practice hunting on the roads because there's a lot of insects there for them to practice on. They don't really know what cars are and they can't fly very well to get out of the way, so they get hit a lot. So it's a good idea to slow down if you know shrikes are there, or even if you don't know shrikes are there and it just looks like good habitat, to slow down just in case is a good idea. I know if it's near a yard site, I'm sure that landholder would be happy for you to slow down anyways to keep the dust down. So it's a win-win. And then another risk, well, it's not likely to be the main driver of their decline. Pesticide use can kind of affect their success year by year. So if you have a good grasshopper year, usually that corresponds with a good shrike year. However, grasshopper booms also come with a lot of spraying to control those populations, which is understandable, but it might affect the shrikes as well. So a shrike might initially be attracted to hunting in an area because there's tons of grasshoppers, and then spraying occurs, the prey disappears, and that availability dips, and then the shrikes have to adjust, and it's just added energy. Pesticide accumulation can also be an issue. Just they are an upper predator, so it can accumulate if they eat a bunch of affected prey items. And then this can just cause issues with eggshell strength over time. So, along with the other things I mentioned to support shrike habitat, if you have shrikes, you can help out by joining the Shrubs for Shrikes program. So, this is the program that I mentioned I coordinate through Nature Saskatchewan. So, it's been around since 2003, following the success of another one of our programs, Operation Burrowing Owl. It's one of 5 stewardship programs that we put on. Each of them targets a different species at risk, and each of them works hand in hand with landholders that have species at risk on their properties. So the landholders that are participating in these programs, they kind of work as their eyes and ears to not only conserve habitat for these species, but also to monitor populations. And it's a great way to monitor presence over a wide area by the people that are actually on the ground out there that are seeing these species. So Shrubs for Shrikes now has about 350 participants, conserving and monitoring 160,000 acres of loggerhead shrike habitat. So it's pretty successful, and we're really happy with that. And as a thank you to all the hard work our participants do, we do have a few perks for being in the program. So we have these personalized gate signs. We get them personalized with like your ranch name or your acreage name, whatever you want really. We do those signs up as a thank you. We also provide personalized beneficial management practice plans that kind of tells you more about their life cycle, the kinds of things they like in their habitat, and things you can do to tweak your practices to benefit both you and the shrikes in their area. As well, each spring we also do a buffalo berry giveaway to all our participants for those wishing to enhance their habitat for shrikes. So as I mentioned, Shrubs for Shrikes monitors populations through our participants, and we do that through our annual census. So each summer we'll mail out a card that looks like this, and it just asks you some simple questions. If you've seen shrikes, what the surrounding habitat looks like, has there been any changes? Is there anything else you're interested in? Would you like us to come have coffee with you and chat about shrikes, which we always love to do? Even if you don't see shrikes, it's really important that we collect that information as well, because absent data on where they're using habitat year to year is really important too. So all this data is collected, personal information is removed, and then is shared with the Conservation Data Center. And this goes on to inform range, population, activities with the species, things like that. And we're really proud over the last 5 years, our programs are responsible for 64% of all loggerhead shrike records that have been submitted to the Conservation Data Center. So that's all our landholders' hard work. And all that information that they've collected themselves, that's going on to inform how shrikes are doing in our province. Now, if you don't own land yourself or might not have shrike habitat, but you see shrikes, you can still get involved. You can give a hoot and call our hoot line. So we do have a toll-free public sighting line that anybody can call, and it's 1-800-667-HOOT or 4668. All public sightings are kept confidential and only shared with permission with the Conservation Data Center. No personal details are ever shared. So we take privacy very seriously. So yeah, we never share personal details. And with that, thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. And if you're interested in the Shrubs for Shrikes program, you can always give me a call out at my email there or at my phone number.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily. And I know you have to be careful giving out your email. I think last year after your
Yes.
monarch butterfly webinar, you had 200 emails, which is
Yeah.
great that there's so much enthusiasm and excitement. um, Beautiful presentation. Like it's a work of art, really. And there's been lots of
Oh, thank
comments
you.
from the attendees to comment just how gorgeous the photography is and the artwork behind it all. So thank you.
Oh, thank
And
you.
you've probably guessed we have lots of questions. um, and I have it set that people can help answer each other's questions and stuff too. And if you have the same question as someone else, feel free to upvote them by just clicking um, the little thumbs up symbol. So Emily, our first question, um, are loggerhead shrikes masks an evolutionary feature to help them defeat police lineups when being prosecuted for their impalement crimes?
Like
um,
to call them like bandit birds because they look like little bandits, but
yeah, exactly. Any idea why they have that black mask?
Um, you know, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I don't have an answer to that. I wonder if it's similar to like some other species that have mask markings, like even like raccoons. I don't know the reason for that, but I wonder if it's similar. But maybe it helps them blend in somehow.
Yeah,
But if anybody
that would be
knows that,
so
I'd
cute.
be super interested to know. So
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone knows, feel free to type it in there. The next one is from a listener named Jeanette, and she says, I'm curious about the large nest in the cemetery. Would that be from 1 year, or do they return to the same nest again?
So they are moderately site fidelic. So the males, so I should mention the pairing it's not necessarily the same male and female that pairs year after year. But the
Mhm.
males, if they've had success 1 year, they tend to come back to that area the next year. And you know, the female might as well. So it might be the same pairing. But the males are more site fidelic than the females. Um, and they might use the same spot, but they might not. So they do move around year to year. So you could have a shrike nest 1 year, and then there'll be a few sparse years where they don't really nest. You might see the male in the spring, and then he doesn't stick around, and then they're back the next year. And it might be a different male, it might be the same male. So that specific nest, it was quite big. So I don't know if they kind of like repurposed a nest or added to one. That was a confirmed Shrike nest, but it was kind of higher up than we typically see them. So it could have been a one-off, but they were successful that year too. There was babies out of that nest. So
Okay, awesome. And a listener named Chris is wondering, he says, I'd like your opinion about the pros and cons of mowing roadside ditches, particularly where shrikes are nesting and actively hunting near roadways. He says, I know low vegetation height can provide shrikes with easier access to prey, but it puts them at greater risk of vehicle collision. Any thoughts on that?
yeah, yeah, so they nest beside roadways a lot just because there's shelter belts near grid roads a lot. So it's always a good idea to slow down. Specifically mowing, um I don't, what are my thoughts on that? Um, I would say like it would give them a bit more visibility and it might give people a little more visibility if there is a shrike in the ditch as well, if it's close to a nest. I would say that the bigger thing would be whether there's like shrubs there though. That would be the more kind of thing that would attract them to closer to the road. But they might take advantage if the ditch is mowed just to see their prey. So I didn't really answer that super clearly, but
That's okay. And you've got your email there, so Chris can reach out too if he wants more details. I know that Chris does some work with wildlife and human collisions or interactions. So yeah, maybe you guys can touch base later. The next question here is from Gail, and she says, beautiful, informative presentation. And she said, you mentioned toxic prey on one slide. What makes prey toxic? What about the shrike? That the shrike knows to leave it in the sun for a while.
Yeah, so that's seen more to the south, not so much here, where there might be more like prey that have developed that as a defensive measure. So it's just certain ones. So they've been known to take, I think it's a frog species that is a bit unpalatable and has like a toxic quality, just to defend against predators. So shrikes have been known to take that, as well as there's a grasshopper more to the southeast that they do regularly prey on that has that as well. And then they've been known to take monarchs too, which of course have a toxic and horrible taste from the milkweed that they feed on. And the shrikes have just learned over time that I guess if they hang the prey, the like sun and the UV kind of breaks down those chemicals and then it makes it more palatable for them. So it's definitely a learned behavior. The babies learn it from their parents. But it's seen more in the south where there are some of those prey species that have developed those defenses.
So interesting.
Yeah, it is a really cool behavior and
Yeah,
like super smart of them.
absolutely. And Jamie Lynn is wondering, will kingbirds and loggerhead shrikes both nest in the same area? Or because the
They
kingbird is
will.
so territorial, they won't allow the shrike to nest?
Yeah, they will. They're both pretty territorial. I'll say the kingbird is a lot more aggressive in my opinion. So they don't overlap a lot, but you could see them within like the same like shelter belt. Like shelter belts can get quite long, so you might see them there. Or if there's a lot of prey availability, they might overlap a bit. And, like we have seen them in like along the fence line together. But they definitely each want their own space and are both quite territorial. So it's not often you'll see them together, but there's actually one of our participants actually sent us, it was really cool. It was like a photo story almost of photos she had taken, and it was a shrike beside a family, an adult and some fledgling eastern kingbirds, and they were sharing a fence line, and they didn't look really happy to be doing so, but it was a really cool observation story that she sent in and had pictures of. So they can be found in the same
Absolutely.
areas.
Oh, that's neat. And we've had a few people comment about the black masks. So Deborah says it keeps light from reflecting in their eyes like quarterbacks. And
Oh
Roland
yeah,
says,
yeah.
yeah, it may help to reduce glare, bright sunlight, similar to athletes wearing like an eye black. So there we go.
Yeah,
We've got the
that
answer.
makes sense.
Right on. Thanks, everyone. So we have a question here from an anonymous person. Is it reasonable to think that loggerhead shrikes increased in range or numbers with settlement, the introduction of shelter belts and barbed wire to the prairies?
So they definitely have adapted to use those areas. I will say they were here prior to that because they're natural habitat. They're not really like a barn swallow who has expanded their range based on that because of they've adapted to using barns. Loggerhead shrikes were here using habitat here before any of that like man-made habitat was here. So they were using buffalo berry and hawthorn on native prairie. And then as that disappeared, then they adapted to using, yard sites and shelter belts. So they have adapted to use that. So I think maybe they would be much worse off if they hadn't done that. But now that both are disappearing, that it's definitely affecting them. So
Do you think that they're preferring barbed wire more and more over time rather than thorny shrubs, or is it location dependent?
they definitely prefer barbed wire to impale their prey. I think that's just my own observation. Okay, so maybe, but usually they'll nest in the thorny area and they'll use that for their larders and to hang their prey for their pantry. But usually even when they're nesting in thorny sites, if we see impalements nearby, it's usually on the barbed wire fence nearby, and that might just be because they can impale their prey on the spike, and they can perch right beside it on the wire. So that might just be ease of use, but
Yeah.
um, it's definitely maybe like a pro to barbed wire. There might be some not so good things about barbed wire on the landscape for a lot of species, but for loggerheads, it's definitely worked out for them. So, um,
Yeah. Right on. And on that note, Ian is wondering if you have seen or would recommend any sort of man-made nesting sites, something to provide perching or nesting while shrubs are still being established.
um, I would always just go with like their native shrubs. I definitely wouldn't recommend like keeping coils of barbed wire in your yard for them to use. They might use those if they're around, but I would say they're much better off using the thorny shrubs. So I would say just like, try your best to establish spaces or keep areas around for them. So if you don't have any thorny shrubs and you're kind of waiting for your buffalo berry shrubs to grow up, because they do take a while. They're a native prairie species, so they're very drought tolerant, but they do take a while to establish. And you have carragana nearby, maybe just check your carragana, maybe keep some of those dead branches at the top for them. It might not look pretty, but it could attract the shrikes there, and they might use that in the meantime until their preferred thorny shrubs are established in your yard. I hope I answered that okay.
Thanks. I think so. Um, so we have quite a bit of interest for outside of Saskatchewan. Is Nature Saskatchewan, is the food line available to other people outside of the province or strictly Saskatchewan?
So Nature Saskatchewan is strictly Saskatchewan. We through our like newsletter, we like to like partner and share stories from elsewhere in their range, of course. So if you have a really cool observational story from Alberta, or if you're in the states just south of us or something, we would love to hear about it, of course, and feature it. But as far as like our program and settings go, we are just Saskatchewan. I know Alberta, there are organizations you can report your shrikes to instead. Operation Grasslands, I think, is one of them. And Nature Alberta is around there. And they do have conservation data centers in all the prairie provinces that you can report sightings to as well. But yes, Nature Saskatchewan is just Saskatchewan. Though we like to hear about cool observations from outside of Saskatchewan.
Awesome. And could you put the hoot line number up again in case someone gives a
Sure.
hoot and would like to to give you a call there? Um, and do you know of any programs in Manitoba at all or anywhere else, like where people could even, have support for keeping shrubs?
Um, in Manitoba, I don't know a lot about the programs available in Manitoba. Shrikes are very rare in Manitoba. Like the one slide mentioned, there's only like 100 left, and that number was from 2013, so they could be doing worse there now, 10 years later. So yeah, there is Nature Manitoba does exist, and it has a lot of great programs. So they could get in touch with them. But yeah, I don't know off the top of my head much
Okay,
about
not a
Manitoba.
problem. That's okay. Um, so we've got quite a few questions still. I told you there could be like 50 questions, and I think we're
All
at
good.
like
I don't have
49.
to go
So
anywhere.
right on. Um, right. We've got lots of comments. Oh, there's a few comments about mowing ditches, where Bill says, as a rural municipality councillor, mowing a ditch or perceived blackout is one of the most common complaints for rate players. Um, have you ever encountered anything like that when, trying to protect shrubs for shrikes?
Not specifically with shrikes. We do come across that a little bit more with our Operation Burrowing Owl program,
Mhm.
just because burrowing owls like to nest in the ditches. I would say it's not such a risk to the shrikes, because like the babies might be, when they're learning to fly, they might like be hanging out in the ditch, but they can fly a little bit. So like they'll fly up into the shrubs, especially if like a mower is coming kind of slowly towards them. They might have enough time to get out of the way. More like the fast moving vehicles, they just can't fly out of the way fast enough for those. And then once the ditch is mowed, they might, like when they're hanging out, they're going to hang out in cover in the longer areas or the shrubs. They might just fly down to hunt. So, which a mowed ditch would be safer for them than the road. So, that might be a good thing. I'm not an expert in that topic, so that's just from thinking about their habitat preferences and what they might do.
Okay. And are you part of any banding projects or Nature Saskatchewan? Could you tell us about what they're up to with banding?
Yeah, sure. So not myself personally, but Nature Saskatchewan does run the Last Mountain Lake Bird Observatory, which does have a banding program and a bander in charge every year. They're out there banding. So it's more like shrikes are a rare visitor, but I know they've gotten a few shrikes through that get caught in their mist nets that they have banded before. So that's always really cool when we see that. But nothing specific for shrikes. But I know they have been through that, and that is an active program that Nature Sask does with just incidental banding of them.
Okay. And do you know of any other birds besides shrikes that impale their prey on shrubs and fences?
So in Saskatchewan, shrikes are the only ones. So
Okay.
so we do use that as an indicator. So if you have impaled prey, it is an indicator that there is shrikes in the area. Now, depending on the time of year, it could be a northern or a loggerhead. So if you see impaled prey like today, that's likely means you have a northern shrike hanging around, and they are kind of more nomadic in the winter. They travel around, so that's kind of cool. But in the summer, yeah, we do use impalement sightings as an indicator that there's shrikes nearby. So, um,
Okay.
yeah, it is a behavior unique to them.
Okay. Right on. So there's a few comments about the range. So Dale had mentioned that it showed on one of your earlier slides that their range is shrinking. And Elizabeth said, you know, the Shrubs for Shrikes program has been in place since 2003, but we're still seeing a decline. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, so their range is declining. I think it's more kind of staying steady the last few years. Still much decline from their historical range. And then we have these like kind of like boom spots within their range. So last year we weren't really sure whether it was just like more people aware of the shrikes, or whether there was more shrikes in that area. But around
Mhm.
Saskatoon, we had a huge number of sightings. Like kind of like the area around Saskatoon, which is kind of more like the northern-ish tip of where they can still be found in the province. So that was kind of cool. And then you get these hot spots here, there, year to year. Um, so yeah, I kind of didn't answer that. What was the question again?
Um, how their range has been changing. I think
Yeah,
you did like
okay.
reporting and is a bias, and yeah, you
Yeah,
said it's
yeah. So, yeah, like so we get the public sightings and then we do our grid road surveys. So, areas we target, there's going to be more because we're specifically looking for them there, and we can't obviously survey the whole province every year. But and then our landowners, that's why one of the important thing is to have as many landowners out there in the program as possible, because they're reporting absence or presence year after year. So that's a long-term data set. And then if we have a bunch of them staying the same, then we can get a better idea of their range and how it's actually on the landscape. So if you're a landowner
absolutely.
with shrikes, join our program.
That sounds great. Well, I think this is a good place to leave it, Emily. I think we've run a little bit over time here, but we had so many comments and questions from the attendees, and I have to pass some of these amazing comments on. Larry says 5-star presentation, thanks. Jeff Holroyd says terrific visuals, a new standard for talks, interesting talk, thank you.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
Dale says great presentation, very knowledgeable, awesome graphics, nicely done. Haley says, my cat also enjoyed your presentation. I don't know if that's a comment or not, or compliment or not.
My cat is also
That's
behind me enjoying, so.
but, fabulous presentation, beautiful slides, and all the information I was hoping to learn. So thank you so much, Emily. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your enthusiasm today.
All right, thanks for having me.
Right on. And thank you so much, everyone, for catching today's webinar. We have a huge selection of webinars on our PCAP YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out. This will be up there probably later today or tomorrow, so you can share it to anyone you know that would have enjoyed this and missed it. And be sure to register for our upcoming webinars, Ord's Kangaroo Rats in January and Piping Plovers in February. So we have an awesome lineup this winter. And when you leave today's webinar, you'll be asked to do a quick 1-minute survey. If you don't mind filling that out, we really appreciate it so we can keep our Native Prairie speaker series going into the future. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.